from the Primal in the Woods studio in sunny Florida. It's the Primal in the Woods podcast with your host, Michael Tunes. This episode is brought to you by NFLcarports.com for all your steel building needs. Whether you're covering cars, toys, boats, tools, it doesn't matter. NFLcarports.com has you covered. Nothing in this podcast is remotely intended to resemble medical advice. If there's something wrong with you, go see a doctor. This podcast is produced for entertainment purposes only for those in the low-carb community. Nothing I say is intended as a prescription to diagnose, treat, or cure a goddamn thing. Go see your doctor if you're messed up, and don't try any of these tricks at home unless you've cleared it first with your designated medical professional. All right, folks, we got a lot to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. The psychology of eating well is today's topic. If you've listened this far, you probably already have a pretty good idea of the diet that I'm talking about, of what I think is healthy. Of course, as a diet of meat, fish, fowl, eggs, cheese, butter, coconut oil, olive oil, all the good fats, and a low-carb approach to eating. We leave out all your cookies, baked goods, breads, grains, industrial seed oils, flours, processed food, and all that kind of crap. And in order to do that, you have to have a pretty good head on your shoulders if you're going to navigate this planet and avoid processed, fast, sugary, nasty foods that make most of us sick and fat. I'm going to assume the interest in the low-carb lifestyle. So let's just jump right into this head game, to this psychology, the emotional, the intellectual, spiritual side of eating a proper diet, not only today or until you can fit into that wedding dress or for some superficial goal weight that you're shooting for. I'm talking about eating healthy for the rest of your life. And in order to do that, we have to first kind of figure out why we haven't been eating well for our entire lives up to this point. And there's two ways to do this. The first way is just to say, oh, wow, I eat Hot Pockets, frozen pizzas, I eat McDonald's all the time, I like deep fried, fatty, breaded everything, and that's why I have weight issues or health issues. It's related to all this food, and so I got to change it. And so now I have to immediately go from someone who's basically microwaved through my food life and become someone who now cooks chicken and broccoli and steak and salad and make all these changes to my diet. Some people, that's just going to click just like that, and you're going to make the changes and you're going to see the results and you're going to be like, oh wow, that was easy, that was cool, I'm glad I figured out the right way to eat. But that's a very low percentage of people that are going to just have that light come on and make the change and everything's smooth and easy. This podcast today really isn't for those folks because those folks don't need it. So let's talk about the other type of person, the type of person that is going to struggle with this, the type of person that can read some of this material and kind of get on board with the idea that fat is your friend. They can get on board with the idea that polyunsaturated fatty acids that are found in canola oil and vegetable oil and corn oil and so forth are bad for us. We can kind of get on board with the fact that it makes sense that a high glucose diet makes problems in our bodies by making us produce a lot of insulin. And so there's a lot of ways we can read and embrace some of these very simple, very logical, very easy to understand ideas that are sort of baked in the cake with low carb living, okay? The science is not that hard to understand and believe once you get past that original shock of just knowing that everything you've ever learned to that point was wrong. But okay, so let's say you've learned enough and you believe, you're a believer, you believe that the right way to eat for the rest of your life is to eat the primal or the keto or the Whole30 or whatever way. You're gonna be low carb, and you know that that's the right way to go. You got a little passion in your belly and you're ready to get started. And now let me say one thing very clearly: how you approach day -1, the day before, what's going on in your head, what thoughts you have and goals you make and strategies that you espouse right from the beginning are going to have a major effect on whether or not you're going to be successful, not only in the short term, but in the long term with low carbohydrate eating. Because we have to remember, you haven't just been lied to about the health of certain foods, of, the stuff that's really good for you being bad and the stuff that's really bad for you being good that we've been raised on, and all the, you throw in all the messages that we've received from food marketing, from fast food TV commercials, from the cereal commercials, from how these products are marketed in our grocery stores, to how we gather socially at restaurants and fast food places, and how we have birthday parties at McDonald's, and how we have to have a cake for a birthday. When you just look at all these messages that have just been growing and growing and growing over generations, it would be real easy to step back and just be like, holy shit, how am I supposed to switch and just eat these approved items, these diet approved items, in a world where it seems like so much of our social, emotional, professional, educational, every aspect of our lives just has this junk food involved in it, and we've got to get that out of our system and get that away from our diet. And in order to do that, we're going to have to trigger some things in our head. We're going to have to look at things a little differently than we've been looking at them. So let's just start with some ideas for breaking addictive behaviors. For many of us, most of us probably, eating bad food feels like an addiction, especially anytime we try to change our diets. There's already a ton of content out there that indicts sugar as an addictive substance, similar to cocaine or nicotine or whatever. But for our purpose here, let's not get too specific on what constitutes good food or bad drugs or any of that. Let's focus on the general process of making changes we know we need to make, that we absolutely must make if we're going to achieve our health goals. But before we can even do that, we have to identify what our goals are. You know, in the old days, this would be the point in the program where I asked you to write things down. You can do that if you want, or if you just want to listen through now and come back to this as an exercise later, you can ponder these questions at any time. So in order to determine what your goals are, you need to ask some serious questions and then give yourself some honest answers. Okay, here are some examples of some of the questions you need to ask yourself. What do I want to change about how I eat? What pain or fear do I associate with changing how I eat? What pleasure am I getting out of how I eat now? What does eating the way I eat now cost me? How has my way of eating affected my relationships? Has my eating caused me any health problems? What have I done in the past to try to control my eating? If eating right is so important, why haven't I changed already? Do I believe I need to change how I eat, truly? Do I accept that changing how I eat means that I must think and act and feel differently about food? Do I know people who have done what I need to do? Is making this change what I truly want? Am I suffering from misery, depression, or feelings of low self-worth? Is it clear that I need a new plan? Am I entirely honest with myself about my food habits? Am I open to new health ideas? If I don't change what I eat, what's going to happen? Can I commit to real change this time? Am I prepared to be uncomfortable? Do I believe I can start to look at food unemotionally, to see it as biochemical fuel for my body instead of some sort of magical thing that always leads to pleasure, reward, social acceptance, or good feelings? Am I prepared to make my goal the most important intellectual pursuit in my life until I accomplish it? Okay, congratulations, you just completed a 12-step program. Not really, but at least maybe you get an idea that figuring out how to totally change how you eat is going to demand a little more effort than just printing out a meal plan and going on a diet. Real change, lasting change, is about fundamentally changing how you approach even the mechanics of eating food. It's going to require that you stop feeling food or loving food or craving food. Becoming healthy means you have to unbecome being unhealthy. So I'll ask again, what are your health goals? What plan do you intend to execute in order to accomplish those goals? What's in your way of achieving your goals? Who's hindering you? What mental bullshit can you see messing this all up? You know, this isn't woo-woo. You need to figure out a plan before you even start planning your meals. If you don't understand what you're really up against here, your chance of failure is 100%. Guaranteed. Because there are a lot of good books out there that can help you get your head on straight, but the only way a book is going to help you make good food decisions day in and day out is if there's someone sitting next to you that uses that book to slap the bad shit out of your hand before you cram it into your pie hole. What's your real goal? What is your practical, actionable, measurable, accountable? What's your plan for achieving that goal? What's going to happen when X, Y, and Z get between you and your goal? What's your plan for eating when you're sleepy or tired or cranky or broke or PMSing or on vacation or worse? What happens when you're totally alone? What's your plan for eating at the times when all you want to do is eat wrong? And keep in mind, making a food plan has nothing to do with making a meal plan. They're two different things. Anybody can make a list of 10 meats they like, 10 vegetables they like, and 5 spices they like, and then you can mix them around and eat a different meal every day of the year if you want to. Planning is goofy easy when you have an overall food plan. Your food plan tells you what's allowed in your mouth ever. A meal plan simply takes orders from your food plan and makes a menu for you for a week or whatever, does your shopping. What's your food plan? Okay, so you have to ask yourself these tough questions, and you have to seriously ponder, even meditate on the answers, okay? You have to come up with a plan. So let's say you come up with a plan and everything looks perfect, you're chugging along nicely, and then all of a sudden you fuck up and eat a cake and Cheerios. Then what? Simple, you start over. And when it happens again, you start over again, and then you start over the next time too. If you get to the point where you say, I just can't do this, I can't eat food this way, then more than likely you're going to have to admit that food isn't the problem. Food's not the firewall. It's probably time to admit that something else is going on in your life that's causing you to fail. You know who says this better than I ever could is Rob Wolf in his last book, Wired to Eat. Let's listen in on an excerpt from Wired to Eat, this particular bit coming from Random House Audio's audible version of Wired, read by Kaleo Griffith.
Let me share a story to make this point. Several years ago, I was hired to manage the food and physical training of a highly successful businessman. Let's call him Dan. Dan's incredible intellect and near fanatical work ethic have produced products from which all of us have benefited. This guy is literally a world mover, and he has also been seriously overweight most of his life. Dan's weight was reaching a breaking point. After he'd crush a gallon or 2 of ice cream, he would suffer vision loss and a number of other problems. He was likely diabetic, but unwilling to go to a doctor lest he be forced to change what he was doing. We were introduced via mutual acquaintances, and he quizzed me on what my plan would be for him, all the while working his way through 2 half-gallons of ice cream. I think he did this to gauge my reaction and to see if he could get a rise out of me, but I'm pretty zen about this stuff. I'll do just about anything to help someone who is motivated to do so. But I can also border on callousness if the person is hell-bent on self-destruction. Whatever the case, I impressed Dan enough that he hired me to work with him 24/7 for 6 months. I'd handle his food and physical training, and would do my best to get him to sleep more than 4 hours per night. The game was on. I cleaned out the pantry, provided a meal plan for the chefs who prepared the meals for Dan's family, and set up a schedule to meet Dan for physical training. All seemed to be progressing fine. Until one evening, when I was walking through the house and smelled what could only be donuts. I knocked on Dan's office door, and sure enough, he was working his way through a bag of donuts. He was evasive about where the food had come from, but with a little digging, I found out that Dan had paid some of his house staff to drive to the donut shop and, at a specific time, throw the bag of donuts over the security fence ringing his property. On the inside of the fence was another staff person who was waiting to intercept the flying bag of fried dough. Once acquired, they delivered the goods to Dan. Not one to be outdone, I went to Dan's wife and explained the situation, then said, I need a budget for a counterinsurgency campaign. I now had a pool of money to pay the staff to not do Dan's bidding with regard to hooking him up with junk food. This worked for a few days, until Dan got wise to our work and simply threatened to fire anyone unwilling to follow through on his requests. I confronted Dan about this, and he just smirked. It's not my job to make your job easy. He was enjoying this, and rather liked the game of spy versus spy. I was a bit stumped about why this guy was making it so hard for me to help him not eat himself to death. In addition to the tactics I just described, Dan would routinely moralize his food failures and turn these minor deviations into an excuse for multi-day benders. I noodled on what the hell was going on, and finally had what proved to be an important insight. None of this had to do with food. Food was a symptom, not the problem. I noticed a pattern. Dan was emotionally distant from everyone, including his wife. The only people he really had no barriers against were his kids. In a flash of insight, I knew exactly what was up, and I had a plan for how to address it. The following day, Dan and I were talking, and I told him how incredibly grateful I was for the opportunity to work with him. I was getting paid very well, and this money was helping my wife and I get a number of projects off the ground much faster than we would have been able to otherwise. I was sincere in this feeling, but was also softening him up to get through his nearly impregnable barrier. I then said something like this: "I'll be able to help so many people as a consequence of my work with you. But I have to admit to feeling a sense of failure, as I have not really been able to help you." This caught Dan off guard, and in a very uncharacteristic moment, he was at a loss for words. I then asked him, "Dan, who didn't love you?" The color drained out of his face, and he replied with a barely audible, "What?" I repeated the question, and he became really agitated, angry, and flustered. He yelled at me in about 6 different languages. He was mad and scared. I asked the question again. "Dan, who didn't love you?" This has nothing to do with food. You know it, and I know it. He sat back in his chair, and I was not sure if he was going to respond, but finally he related the story of his childhood. His parents were hard chargers and did not have the time to raise him. This duty fell on his nanny. He rarely saw either of his parents and was a bright, precocious child who needed love. His nanny knew this on some level, and in addition to her normal caregiving, she prepared elaborate breakfasts of pancakes, crepes, and, not infrequently, ice cream. She would talk and laugh with Dan. They would sing and play games, all the while celebrating with food. For Dan, the association was set. Food was love. I took all this in and then told Dan that was to be my last day working with him. He needed to work with a therapist. He needed to get his whole family involved. Dan was pretty taken aback and brought up the fact that I wouldn't be making the money, which I had just said was so important. Money was a major point of control for Dan, and he defaulted to it immediately. I told him I was not going to take his money and continue to facilitate his situation. Knowing what I knew, I felt that would be amoral. I would be cheating him. I would be extracting benefit from his continued suffering. Dalliances with junk food is not cheating. Gaining financial benefit from another person's suffering is. Do you see the difference? Can you feel it? Dan is doing pretty well now. He has lost a lot of weight, and he is a much more pleasant person to be around. He nearly went through a divorce during this process, but he and his wife managed to motor through things. Dan is not perfect. He has better and worse days, but his new normal is a far cry from what it was, both with his eating and his relationships. Speaking of relationships, Dan did not need a healthy relationship with food. He needed to connect with his friends and family, and he needed to heal from being abandoned as a kid. Focusing on food was a distraction, not a solution. If you moralize your eating, if you think you still need to find a healthy relationship with food, I am 99.99% sure you are focusing on the wrong things. It's not about the food. It's about something else. And that something else likely boils down to love and connection.
You know, I think I'm going to leave this right here, folks. It's a great topic for further discussion, and we could go on forever. But it boils down to this. Change is hard. And when we consider this perverted food environment we live in, it's more than hard. It's almost impossible, but it is doable. It's doable if you commit to doing it. It's doable if you have a goal and a plan to reach that goal. It's doable if doing it successfully is something that's meaningful and important to you. If you're just mindlessly chasing the next diet plan out of some sick fascination you have with thinking that there's bound to be a shortcut, I don't know how to help you. I don't know what to tell you. You're not only going to fail, but you're never even going to understand why you failed. And that's why most dieters fail, is because when it's just you and the food wins. And the reason the food wins is because you don't have a plan. You haven't spent enough time thinking about your strategy. You haven't thought about what to do in moments of crisis, or worse, the times when you're bored. You haven't... Holy shit, there's a phone call. Hang on. Phone call coming in. Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, is this Katy?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
What's going on?
Oh, nothing. I'm just kind of in the middle of recording my second podcast here.
Oh, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, it's cool. No big deal. I mean, 5 million people are going to listen to us, and I don't know how to turn this recording thing off. That's okay. Let's just, yeah. How is the family?
They're good. My boys just left for school, so the house is now quiet, thankfully.
Cool. Katy, I'm kind of actually glad you called. One of the things that I'm talking about here in this podcast, theme of the podcast is kind of like the psychology of eating well. And one of the things that I'm struggling to kind of put to words right now is talking about like downtime. You know, boredom tends to trigger behaviors that kind of set off the reward systems in the brain. You know what I mean? Like eating, smoking cigarettes, drinking, stuff like that. And I know that you and I kind of share kind of a similar work schedule where we're super busy sometimes, and then other times there's a lot of downtime.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know we've discussed in the past that you've had your own share of struggles with that downtime, and I was wondering if you could just kind of talk to me a little bit about how you approach that downtime now, and if you found some good ways to kind of overcome those triggers and reward things that go on in your brain when you're looking to cure that boredom.
Sure. I honestly, we all have those little voices in our heads that either tell us, to give in to those impulses or to ignore those impulses. And I wish I could say I found a way to ignore that voice that says do it. I really haven't. I think the main thing that I have done is try to do things to distract myself from those voices. So instead of having all this idle time, I do my best to find other things to do and create new hobbies for myself and new interests. And so far that seems to help quite a bit.
Well, cool. And, I know in the past, the diet's been a big focus, and I know that you have personally spent hours and hours and hours being helpful to other people in Facebook diet groups in particular. And
hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've seen a lot of your answers and they always look good to me. And then the way you treat people is second to none either. You have a way of being informative and polite at the same time, which is sometimes unusual in the interwebs,
Yes, absolutely.
But tell me a little bit about lifting and strength training and stuff. When did you first decide that was a hobby you wanted to take up?
I don't really know if it was ever just a decision where I said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. In 2015, my husband got on a tangent and decided he was going to start lifting. I think he downloaded Mark Ripeto's book, Starting Strength, and was telling me all about it. And some of the things he's interested in, I'm just kind of like in one ear and out the other, which,
right.
Hopefully he doesn't hear this.
That's marriage.
But, he kept talking about it, and he bought a pretty basic, squat rack and weights and stuff, and started working out at our house. So, I couldn't help but notice what he was doing, and I have never been athletic my whole life. I mean, I did dance, which is definitely exercise, but it's not like I did any sort of strength sports at all. Right. I'd never really picked up anything other than a Barbie weight in my whole life. But right. I was watching him, and I went, that looks pretty awesome. I feel like I could try it. And so I just kind of dived in and decided I was going to give it a go. And I did it, and I realized I didn't hate it as much as, some other forms of exercise. And, I wasn't really consistent with it really until this year. I always kind of kept coming back to it. It's more fun than being on a treadmill for 45 minutes.
Right.
But it's still something that there are days where I'm just like, but I have to make myself do it anyway.
Well, that brings up a great point. How do you make yourself do it? How do you, on the days that you don't feel like it, what goes through your head? What makes you do it?
Honestly, the days that I don't feel like doing it are usually the days that I end up having one of the best training days. I'll go in and I'll be like, oh, not feeling well. And I'll start to warm up and be like, this is going to suck really bad. Everything's going to feel really heavy. And then somewhere in there, I just kind of get out of my own head and just focus on the work. And then when I'm done, I get this rush, just like, they have a runner's high. You get the same thing with weightlifting.
Yeah.
And be done and be like, man, I'm really glad I did that. And I usually do it in the mornings, which, obviously not everybody has that luxury. But I think it's really important because that might be the hardest thing you do all day.
Right.
And get it out of the way first thing. It's like, wow, well, everything else just seems really small in comparison.
Yeah, I don't lift a lot of weights. I do a lot of body weight exercises and some hiking and that kind of thing. But I definitely, I get up. There's certain things that I just do that are kind of work related that I like to get done before anybody else is up and about. And then once I get that done, which is usually sometime around 8 o'clock, I like to do any kind of exercise I'm going to do then, for the same reason. If you get it out of the way, it's done.
Yep.
If you're not working out till 8:30 tonight, then you got all day to decide whether you're going to do it or not. Whereas if it's more of a, okay, that coffee was great, now let me get this done and get it over with. So I agree with that. Can I ask you a question? This is more just of personal interest to me with the way Rachel and I exercise. We're not always the best partners. We're both we're both perfectly capable of coaching one another, pushing one another, but when we do it, it's almost like that'll cause a divorce. You know what I mean? So I was wondering if you and Roger work out together, or are you able to? Is he able to come out and help you get one more rep or anything like that, or do you guys keep your workouts separate?
Well, there have been times where we worked out together and it's worked really well. That's definitely the exception to the rule.
Exactly, same here.
For the most part, he has the tendency, well, actually we both have the tendency to overanalyze every little thing. And so if I point out something about his form, instead of continuing on with his workout, he's going to get caught up with, oh, well, I need to fix this, or why is this happening? And I don't like being criticized.
Right.
If he tells me something about my form, I'm just like, can you just shut up and let me live? So, like I said, every once in a while it's good, especially when we're in a group setting. But he doesn't like going to the gym and being coached in a group. Right. He hates it. Yeah. So the few times we've done it, I've really enjoyed it, but he was extremely uncomfortable. So for the most part, we keep our workouts separate. Yeah,
Rachel and I do too. We actually had a great experience the first time we worked out together. Mm-hmm. And we did. We pushed each other and it was exciting and everything. But as we kind of developed separate routines and strategies, our ability to kind of work together as workout partners, it's kind of like, nah, we better stick with being husband and wife and figure out a different way to push. Luckily for Rachel, she's very driven herself, and there's very few people that will push her farther than she will push herself anyway. So, yeah. So she can get a great workout in. I'm more of a ouch, I'm gonna quit kind of person. So if we could get over that, it would be helpful to me for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, but we're kind of getting in the woods here from the topic, so I'm going to try to bring us back to that if we can. We can talk about this in great detail in another time maybe, but since I'm recording this podcast, let me ask you, let's kind of come back to food and diet and stuff like that. You like I've done, I kind of go in spurts of crazy focus on my dietary goals, and then I go into some periods to where it's just like, nah, I'll be all right. It's really, I've done this before. If I slack off and gain 5 pounds, no big deal. I know what to do to get that back off.
Yes.
And maybe for people like us that are still fairly young and not diagnosed with any crazy diseases, maybe that's fine. But some other people need to be a little more structured.
Yes.
With what they eat, and going off the rails can be really damaging, either to their bodies or to their psyche.
Yes.
So as you have experienced this, and as you've talked to others, and I don't even care what diet type it is. I know that you do work out in gyms and you talk to people that I'm sure do all different types of diets, not just low carb or ketogenic.
That's actually kind of a bad word in the workout world for the most part.
Well, it sure seems to be popular everywhere else, man. Everybody who used to identify as paleo has now come out with some sort of keto product or book or something, and I just have to think it's a bandwagon thing. Paleo's kind of become a dirty word because, as it turns out, maybe some cavemen did eat some vegetables or whatever. Keto's just kind of popular, and I'm really afraid that people that don't really have a lot of faith in ketogenic diets long term are kind of jumping on the bandwagon just because it's popular.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's true.
But that said, when you are dialed in and focusing on your diet as a means to accomplish some goal. Okay, and the reason I phrase it that way is because for too many people, the diet is the goal. The goal is to white knuckle it through this day without eating a potato, or the goal is to lose 10 pounds by my daughter's wedding so that I can fit in some dress. You know what I mean? The goals are not always in line with maybe the best strategy for successfully eating right. But when you're dialing in on a goal and you're focused on your eating, and you have these days, you get the kids off to school, 8 o'clock, you go ahead and do your workout, and now it's 9:30, and then you still got half a day to kill. Those are the times that I think a lot of people struggle with. When you don't have a lot to do, you got a day or half a day just to kind of kick around and not do anything. And it's easy to become distracted by the boredom, and your mind's like, what do I need something, and then, well, food is usually an easy way to light up your brain activity a little bit,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, every workplace in America, the donuts, the sugar in the coffee, all that stuff. That's what all that's for. It's to light up the brain so people can get to work in the morning. And when you're home alone with that free time, which I have from time to time too, what are your strategies? And people won't know this, but you live in a home where your husband and kids are not necessarily eating the same diet you're eating most of the time, correct?
Yeah, not even close.
Okay, so their foods are in there, right?
Yeah.
And it's 9:30, you feel good, you worked out, everything's done, you got nothing to do for a while. How do you resist that, just going in and mindlessly doing that? You mentioned you do other things. I don't know, it's kind of, I guess I'm kind of reaching here for the right question, but what have you done? Like you mentioned, pursue interests or hobbies or activities. What have you done that's like kind of surprising, that something you found to occupy your time that may be a departure from what you kind of consider your personality?
Good question.
Well, and the reason I say it that way is because anybody can make a list of things they're comfortable with, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But comfortable activities are really not that different from boredom.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true. Well, I mean, honestly, with working out, which, I kind of keep coming back to, and I say it because I danced in high school, and actually I danced from the age of like 9 to 18. So that was very much a part of my identity for a formative part of my life.
Sure.
But when I became an adult, like, I didn't do any of that. I didn't dance at all. I didn't dance. I didn't work out. I dabbled in running, but didn't really want to do it. So I started going to classes at my gym for hip-hop cardio, dance fitness, and it was really hard the first time. My face was really red. I was really out of breath, but I kept going and kept going and kept going, and pretty much made it a habit. So that as soon as my kids left, like right now I'm getting ready to go, I would just go. And it got to the point where my instructors and even a couple other students, said, you really should get certified to teach this. And I was like, I'm not really a teacher. I don't really want to do that. I kind of just want to go and have fun. And after a while, I kind of just listened to the noise, and I got certified. And so now I teach a fitness format, which is really weird.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, if you told me 10 years ago that I would be teaching anything fitness related, even though it's dance, which is more comfortable for me, but the fit part, I think, is what's really outside my comfort zone. Because even now, even though I'm in better shape, I don't look at myself and see a super fit person. But in a way, I think that is kind of what can be relatable.
Exactly.
You don't have to be super fit to work out. And I think having an instructor that looks like a normal person kind of makes you feel, well, hey, if she can do it, then maybe I can do it too. So I try not to give myself too hard of a time about that. So, okay, your question was...
Well, it's
idle time. I mean, basically just that. I've basically transformed myself from someone who actually used to joke all the time about moving. I was like, oh, I don't like, moving and doing things, so I'm not going to exercise. Like, that was kind of my shtick, to being somebody who works out twice a day. Because after I go to my UJAM class this morning, I'm going to go work out and train for a strongman competition.
Strongman competition. Tell me about that. I've seen you post on Facebook a little bit about some of the things you're doing to prepare for it, but when's that coming up?
It's January 20th.
And you haven't really been training for this that long, have you?
No, I started about 5 weeks ago.
Holy crap.
I was kind of lifting on and off before then. Like I said, I started playing around with a barbell in 2015, and then I did what lazy people usually do, and I stopped. Right. And then last year, I kind of dabbled again in the summertime with Roger on and off, and then kind of stopped. And then this year, I was like, that was kind of my goal, my New Year's goal. I was like, I'm just going to be consistent. Like, I'm gonna try to keep my diet in check, but even if I have a bad day, I'm gonna work out. Like, that's gonna be something I need to make a habit. And
right.
I've been a lot more consistent this year than I have in years past. I won't say that I've done every single day since the beginning of the year, because I haven't.
Sure.
But I hired a coach about 5 weeks ago to kind of help me, because I'm sure. I don't know who you're going to play this to, but I'm sure most people don't really know what strongman is, or if they do know, they might have just kind of seen it on TV.
My audience probably doesn't know anything about it, but it doesn't really matter. The points you're making that I think are great points, if I can just kind of back up and kind of summarize there, is the question was, what have you done to fill in your board time? And then I had mentioned earlier that comfort activity is still kind of boring, and you basically just summed up perfectly the idea of taking on some hobbies or activities that are totally uncomfortable at first. You had some dance experience, but now you're teaching a dance class. That's awesome. I mean, that didn't come without some discomfort and some getting outside your zone a little bit, and then
that's still there. And then I'm trying not to think too much about my competition in January, because honestly, it scares the heck out of me.
lifting in front of a crowd may be a little different than lifting in the garage, huh?
Yeah, and I'm not that strong. I mean, I'm strong compared to probably the average population, but when you put me in a gym that does powerlifting and strongman, like I'm.
Right.
I'm pitiful. So it's all about perspective too.
Yeah, and I feel similarly with this podcast. You've known me for a while. How long was I talking about writing a book about this crap?
It's been a really long time.
Yeah, but you know what I realized? Writing a book is I'm comfortable being a writer. Writing a book about this stuff is boring as shit to me, because it's comfortable, it's kind of a pain. It's like I have no problem putting words together and writing, and then and then it's just like torture for me to try to structure that into a 300 or 400 page book. But doing what I'm doing here, kind of ad-libbing and podcasting and using my voice instead of my typing in order to communicate my thoughts, is way outside my comfort zone. And it's not something I'm any good at. It's not something I've practiced, but I just decided I'm gonna be good at it. And so some of that board time I'm filling in with doing these podcasts, and I'll expand to some other videos and stuff. And in no way, shape, or form do I think I am the best qualified person, the best sounding voice or anything like that, but I just, screw it, it's something I want to do. And when I've got some free time away from work, this is something I want to engage in. And in doing this, I keep my brain kind of focused on what my health goals are. And then like I get an opportunity here to talk to you who is talking about exercise, which is something I need to do more of. And so that puts that seed even further in my head. So I'm in the same boat. I'm going a different direction. I mean, God love you for lifting all that weight and shit, but this is a lot easier for me.
Well, if you push yourself outside your comfort zone, no matter what it is, that's what you're going to be thinking about. You know, your mind's going to be consumed with this newest venture. I don't think anxiety is always a bad thing. If you can distract yourself, to me, it doesn't make any sense for somebody to think about diet, be like, okay, I want to make this change. Now I'm going to sit here and worry about making it all the time. I'm just going to, because then your mind's going to be overwhelmed by, don't eat this food, don't eat this food, don't do this. Don't. And it's so negative. But I think if you can, like you said, do something that's not comfortable. So for me, a strongman competition.
Right.
That's what I'm going to be thinking about most of the time. I'm not sitting here going, oh, I really shouldn't eat that, or I really shouldn't do that. Like, my mind is consumed by, oh, well, I really need to make sure I train this, or I'm going to be looking at these videos. And, you know, by the time that's over, I realize I haven't even thought about food. To me, I think it's really important to just take that factor out of the equation and focus on something different.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but have you ever noticed, like, especially like in Facebook groups, have you ever noticed that people tend to make the food their obsession?
Oh, for sure.
And their activity that they use to try to distract themselves is to dial so deep into their food that instead of just eating 2 or 3 times a day like normal human beings, that they're just spending all their waking hours thinking about food. And I wonder sometimes if that's not a good distraction, if your goal is to lose weight or eat healthier or whatever. I'm just wondering if spending your downtime thinking about your food might be a little counterproductive.
Well, for sure. And I know you and I have different viewpoints on the tracking thing. But I feel like if people are going to track, if that works for them, because it doesn't work for everybody, you should figure out what you're going to eat for the day, first thing, and then forget about it.
Exactly.
Because if you sit and you try to, you know, make every little thing fit throughout the day, then like you said, you're just going to be thinking about food all day. And for many of us who've dealt with obesity or weight issues, thinking about food is part of the problem. Even if you're thinking about it in a different way now, you're still obsessing. Yeah, so I just see how people have the tendency to do that with tracking or even without. But
Joe Rogan, I listen to his podcast quite a bit, and something that he has said over and over again recently, and for those that don't know Joe Rogan, he was the Fear Factor guy, and he does UFC broadcasts. He's a commentator for UFC. He also has probably the most popular podcast in the world. And he also does stand-up comedy. And one of the things he mentions all the time is he does hard shit. And when he does hard stuff that he's not good at, like with him, it's like bow hunting. And he's just now started into like running and stuff that he never really did before. When he does hard stuff that has nothing to do with his career or his family or whatever, he just does hard stuff. It makes him better at what he does.
Right.
So he takes that, I guess, accomplishment or the lessons learned from doing hard stuff, and he applies it to his work, and it makes work a lot easier. And that's something that I really, I'm always looking for how things come together and how one thing associates to another in your life. And I think how we deal with our downtime, how we deal with that time when we're just sitting there alone in our head, having whatever thoughts we're having. I think what we do with that time and dealing with that is really important, especially to people starting out with a serious health or weight goal. I think you almost have to say, okay, here's how I'm going to eat. Boom, that's how I'm going to eat. That's just like taking the kids to school or going to work or whatever. That's just the way it is. That's a chore.
Right.
That's a chore. It's got to get done. Now, since I'm going to eat better and live healthier and feel better, now what do I want to do? I think too many people get bogged down into defining who they are by some new diet or new, if it's exercise, whatever the plan is. Rather than saying, okay, I got this activity down and this activity is good for me. now what do I do with my life? You know what I mean? I think that might be a better way to look at it than obsessing constantly about the food. And I got a segment in this podcast called Smart Answers to Stupid Questions from Facebook Diet Groups. and one of those questions is about that. Hey, Katy, I know you got Strawman coming up January 20th.
Yep.
And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to talk to you again and record it for a future podcast. Maybe you can tell me about the experience and, once you've had a chance to go through it and think about it a little bit, maybe we could get back together again and talk about it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay. All right. Katy, it was good to hear from you. I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Well, you have a good day.
All right. You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
That was Katy Gires from Texas, a longtime friend and fellow low-carber, helping us sort this stuff out. Thanks, Katy. Hopefully, I'll learn where the pause button is on this damn thing eventually. Anywho, let's go in a different direction and talk about calling in the SWAT team to help you make a better eating plan. Now, I'm spelling SWAT S-W-O-T, not S-W-A-T. The reason for messing with the spelling is that SWAT with an O stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now you will need a pen and paper for this one. What we want to do here is make 4 lists under the 4 obvious headings of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then you want to make a list of beliefs, lifestyle factors, activities, people, thoughts, hang-ups, job duties, and other things that seem to fall under each of these headings. Let me give you a quick example. When I switched to my Primal version of keto in 2013, I did this exercise, and I started with strengths. And under strengths, I listed things like I can eat meat again, I like to grill, I believe in the diet from the perspective of science, I think Mark Sisson is a good guy to follow, my wife's doing it with me, I have a fridge and a microwave at work so I can bring my lunches, stuff like that. Under weaknesses, I listed stuff like I never stick to anything, I don't exercise enough, I love beer, I hate avocado, mayonnaise, sour cream, and ranch dressing, so I don't know what I'm going to eat with this high-fat stuff. Under opportunities, I listed things like I can eat at my desk and use my lunch hours for exercise. I can learn to be a better cook. I can prove to myself that I can stick to something. And if this works for me, it might work for my brothers and sisters too. Under threats, I wrote dining out might be a challenge. There's beer everywhere. I like beer. I mentioned that before. And it's so easy for me to blow off diets and give up. And then one threat was if Rachel goes back to being a vegetarian, I might have a hard time sticking with it in a house where she's not doing it with me. I had several other items under each heading, but you get the picture. By identifying my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I was on the lookout both for potential pitfalls that were fairly predictable, and at the same time, I had my list of strengths and opportunities to reflect on whenever I needed a reminder of why I think I can do this. If you have a friend or spouse that can help you make this list even better, they might catch some things you're liable to miss. Taking an honest personal inventory is never easy. But if you want to have any chance of doing this right and doing it forever, you have to do this exercise or something like it. It doesn't have to be this exact same thing. Start this change with open eyes. Start this change with honest expectations and have an emergency preparedness plan that helps you weather the storms that will certainly come. Healing a broken physical body is not fast. It is not easy, but it is possible. But it's only possible if your head's on straight, right from the beginning, with a true purpose, a true goal, and a good plan. Don't make this mistake of just jumping into this and being like, oh, I tried that for a couple of weeks and it didn't work for me. And you know what? You didn't try shit. You tried a diet. You read a magazine article. You got on board with some stupid crap that your friend talked you into and you didn't even research it. That's not making a change, people. Going on a quick diet, trying to lose 10 pounds for some bullshit reason, and when you really need to lose 30, that's not a diet. That's not eating right. That's not eating well. It's a gimmick. It's a short-term solution for a problem that's never going away. It's a Band-Aid. It's nothing. Make real change. Find real health. Stop pretending that it's something that it's not. All right, on that positive note, let's move on to your favorite segment and mine, great answers to stupid questions from Facebook diet groups. You know, I'm going to get help reading these questions and going over them. Please welcome to the studio my diet hero. She's my inspiration. She's my partner in crime. Please welcome to the microphone my lovely wife, Rachel Toombs.
Dork.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, Rachel and I have combed Facebook through some diet groups looking for some kind of stupid questions. Not so much stupid questions, but maybe they're phrased in a way that the answers they're going to get from the folks in these groups are going to be stupid. And so we just try to take some of those questions that should be fairly simple to answer and sort of give good, clear, concise answers to the questions. So we picked, yesterday we picked out about 10 or 12 questions, and we have time for 4 or 5 of those today. So Rachel, why don't you just randomly select one of those questions and let's get started.
Larry writes, I have heard a couple of you talk about fasting. When and how long do you fast? Is it a requirement or just a suggestion?
Wow, well, fasting is never a requirement by any means, but when done right, it can be a powerful metabolic therapy or even a diet tool. But before we can really talk about fasting in terms of why do it or how long you should do it, first we have to define what fasting is. Fasting by definition means you do not ingest any food for some period of time. Purists will say that the only thing you can consume during a fast is water. Others will say that non-calorie beverages are okay, but that drinks like black coffee or green tea contain xenobiotics, which are compounds that have to be processed by the gut or the liver, and that starts the secretion of digestive enzymes, thus breaking a fast. Now, if you spend any amount of time in diet world, you're going to hear about all kinds of, quote, fasts, unquote. Fat fast, egg fast, beef and butter fast, the Daniel fast. It's like giving up one thing that makes what you're doing a fast, and that's just a complete hijacking of the word for purposes that have nothing to do with proper fasting. I'll never talk about those fake fasts again because they have no place in the intelligent dieter's brain. Eating the same shit over and over again isn't fasting, it's insanity. Your cat eats the same thing every day, and she's not fasting, she's eating what you feed her. So forcing yourself to eat a limited diet where every meal looks the same is something, but it's definitely not fasting. Fasting is water only. Okay, so when you do a fast, how long do you fast? The first time you fast should probably be an accident. You skip breakfast or you forget your lunch or you're stuck in an airport, something like that. Let your first experience with fasting come up naturally and take that opportunity to give it a shot. Oh crap, I forgot my lunch. I guess I'll just drink water and wait till dinner to eat. That's a great time to start fasting. How long is that? What, 6, 8, maybe 10 hours? That's a perfect start. Not only is it a reasonable amount of time, but you can also easily predict when it's going to end. I get off at 5, 30 minutes to the house, 30 minutes to cook, and I'm macking out at 6. Anyone cannot eat until 6 o'clock. As time goes on, you may want to experiment with longer fasts. People I know go 24, 36, or 48 hours fairly regularly. They'll do this once a week or so, sometimes more. It kind of depends on your philosophy of dieting. If you enjoy submitting to tough experiments to see how your body responds, then yes. Then play with fasting like you count your macros or do your CrossFit. If the answer is no to that question, then don't fast. Fasting is for people who are dialing something in. This means they're already happy with their overall strategy of what they're doing and they want to play with some fine tuning. If you're there, then fast, however often and however long you feel comfortable doing it. If you're just starting out and you're still worried about shopping, cooking, what to eat, is fat really good for me, all that crap, then fasting is probably a tool you're not ready to use. Keep it in the tool belt, pay attention to what's being said about fasting, but don't try to force it into your program. And don't let anyone tell you that you need to intermittent fast. You don't need to do anything beyond eating the approved foods when you're hungry. Anything beyond that is for people who are 90 to 95% dialed in and happy with the basics and are already ready to play with different strategies. I would not plan a fast until you've been 100% compliant with the foods for at least 60 days.
Angela says, anyone notice sugar in the ingredients for uncured bacon, yet 0 carbs? Someone explain.
Angela, uncured doesn't mean that it's not cured at all. It means that the cure does not contain sodium nitrite, just salt. The cure, based on the ingredients, is going to include sugar, probably to offset the salt a little for taste. One thing to keep in mind, though, is the cure gets rinsed off before it's ready to eat. There will be very little sugar in the bacon. I wouldn't worry about it. The amount of sugar in the entire package of bacon would be negligible. The amount in each slice, practically 0. As for nitrates and nitrites, fresh vegetables contain way more of those things than bacon, so I would say bacon is a fairly worry-free food when eaten in moderation. All right, Rachel, what do we got next?
Gail wants to know, how long is everyone doing this way of eating, and how much weight have you kept off? Has anyone been doing this 5 years or more? Thank you.
Gail, this would have been a great question if it had been posed correctly. The question, what you're really asking is this diet safe long-term? And if I stick to it long-term, what can I expect? Another unsaid part of your question is probably, and if I go off of it, am I going to gain the weight back like I have every other time with every other diet? The great answer here is a simple one. Lots of people have been doing this for 5 years or way longer. There are 10 or 15 people in my network that have done it. Art Devaney is like the grandfather of carb-restricted dieting. He's been doing it since the 70s. Mark Sisson has been eating primally for about 20 years. It's 100% sustainable for the rest of your life as long as your diet is based in whole foods. If you're chugging liquid fat and doing crazy fasting and shakes and shit, then it's not going to work out for you long term. Not necessarily because it's bad nutrition, but because it's a bad way to eat food. I think that in order to be sustainable, you need to eat food that looks like food. For the last part, if you quit, you're likely going to gain the weight back. If you go back to high carb, high sugar, processed crap eating, there's no way around it. There's no diet in the universe that lets you lose weight and keep it off after you go back to shit eating practices. You have to eat well in order to keep the weight off. Does that mean you have to stay strict ketogenic forever? No, not necessarily. Once your metabolism is healthy and you're fat adapted and lose the weight, then you'll probably be able to introduce some more fruits, beans, wild rice, sweet potatoes, and the like back into your diet. Once you're insulin sensitive again, you'll be able to tolerate those foods much better, and you can probably enjoy them in moderation forever. You're not going to suddenly be able to tolerate Domino's and Dunkin' Donuts, though. If you go back to crap, you're going to be fat and sick again. There is no other possibility. All right, Rachel, I think we have time for a couple more. What do you got?
Brian asks, how important is it to hit your calories for the day if you're already full?
Jesus, Brian, it's not important at all. Why on earth would you eat if you're full? That's what fat people do. Fit people don't eat when they're full. In fact, fit people usually stop eating before they get full. Don't force feed for any reason ever. If you need to be force fed, you're likely in a hospital with a bunch of tubes sticking out of you. Never gag down food to hit a macro, ever.
Morgan has a long one. I got back on Keto Wagon this AM. My integrative dietitian had me do a DNA test to see why my weight loss was so slow. She said I had to eat 180 grams of carbs a day. Mind you, they were complex carbs. I gained 6 pounds. I am insulin and inulin resistant. The report said that I needed to work out 300 minutes a day. Are you kidding? I'm 61 and 2 times cancer survivor. Maybe 10 years ago, LOL. My DNA results stated that I have the motherfucker gene expression. Okay, I can live with that, but work out 300 minutes a day? Really? I need to lose 40 pounds, and I know I can do it with keto.
Rachel, you can't say motherfucker on the radio. The name of the gene actually reads MTHFR, which indeed looks like a license plate abbreviation for mother, but what it really refers to is the methylation of folate. Folate, not to be confused here with the vitamin folic acid, is important to normal gene and epigenetic expression. It's critical to DNA synthesis and repair. Folate also plays a role in dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, histamine, serotonin, and estrogen metabolism. Not surprisingly, folic acid deficiency is a consistent finding in depression. Folate supplements play a role in forming SAM or SAMe, which is the compound that directly donates methyls to DNA and to serotonin and dopamine. Like folate, SAM is available in supplemental form. SAM's a popular remedy for depression and arthritis. It's likely that individuals who respond to SAM are actually in need of folate. It makes sense to try folate before SAM because it's much less expensive. Look for folate where you buy high quality supplements, or if you suspect that you have motherfucker gene mutation. There's a pretty good chance you do. To find out for sure, spend the money and let 23andMe tell you for sure. Go to 23andme.com. It's as simple as spitting in a tube and dropping a $100 bill. All right, Rachel, I got time for one more. What do you got? Make it a short one.
Frank wants to know. So my son works at Popeye's Chicken and gets a free meal every shift, and he has no idea what he can eat other than the coleslaw. Any ideas?
Well, first of all, Frank, he doesn't want to eat the coleslaw. The coleslaw at most fast food places is full of sugar. He needs to get like a 2 or 3 piece fried chicken and just take all the breading off. That's your answer every time. Don't turn down a free meal just because it's fast food, but don't eat shit just because it's free either. The right compromise here is to eat the chicken and toss the breading. You get a decent shot of fat and protein, and a lot of the residual garbage from frying it in the industrial seed oils is going in the trash with the breading. If I could walk into Popeyes and get a free 3-piece every day, I'd do it pretty often. All right, so that's going to wrap up this segment of great answers to stupid questions from Facebook. Rachel, I want to thank you for all your help.
Always a pleasure.
You know, folks, that's going to wrap up this podcast, I believe. You know, I don't want to leave you with the impression that I don't think you can make a lifestyle change. I know you can, as a matter of fact. I wanted this podcast to be a serious one in tone, to a point, about what it really takes to get your head on straight to do this right. This is something that I take pretty seriously. It's an aspect of all this that I find to be critical. which particular foods you eat and how much protein's in your chunk of hamburger or how much fat is on your salad. I don't give a crap about any of that. If you're eating the right foods and you're putting reasonable portions on your plate, you're going to be fine. But in order to make sure that you're in a position to do that effectively every time, meal in, meal out, day in, day out, week in, week out, you've got to have a plan that is working you towards your goal. And you have to have a strategy that makes sense and a strategy you can stick to. That's going to do it for today. We will catch you next week. This is the Primal in the Woods podcast, brought to you by NFLCarports.com. Please check us out on Twitter at Primal Woods, or on Facebook. We have a group and a page, Primal in the Woods. Please join us next week, where I'm going to get into this protein debate a little bit. We're going to talk about how much protein we need, how much we might consider too much protein. Topic of fiery debate in keto world. So I will see you then. Until then, peace.